does in the field of the internet. More colleagues are becoming more, seeing more the importance of the digital, of the internet and its governance, and are bringing it into their own fields of work. I see colleagues now doing education with regard to digital citizenship and the internet, culture and digitalization, plenty of fields. It's really growing quite a lot. I think my point I would like to say regarding the interface between governments and civil society in the Council of Europe is a question of secretariat. As you said, Miriam, I think it's a good and important point too. I think my experience in the Internet Governance Forum is that the Secretariat can be, if you like, a bridge between governments and civil society. They can be seen to be a trusted intermediary, if you like, to get the points of view across and back from the different actors. I think it's very important. At the same time, it's very important to understand is that we serve the member states, and so therefore we are there to ensure that there is dialogue, and that member states will create things, they will initiate things, and they will agree on things as member states. So that's very clear. We do that in all of the different structures of the organisation on human rights, rule of law, and democracy. We do that in other spaces, like you've mentioned, Mary, like in ICANN. Some of you know, I'm quite involved in ICANN work, and I think a good example is work. We did a report by a couple of experts a couple of years ago, which triggered debate in ICANN on its human rights credentials or the issues there, and that's led to further discussion. And actually, this year, very importantly, two declarations adopted by the member states, the 47 member states, were adopted in June, one on the WSIS plus 10 and an extension of the IGF mandate, which talks about the importance of multi-stakeholder dialogue, of course civil society, the importance of making sure that those negotiations and discussions leading up to New York involve the voice of different actors, not just member states. And the other declaration was on ICANN, human rights and the rule of law. Again, serving member states, helping member states, and also helping even ICANN and the communities, so therefore helping civil society in the communities. So quite clearly, it's clear that it's recognised in learning by doing that we are really engaging with civil society, even in texts which are adopted and also in their implementation. What I've learned is that to have an internet governance strategy that you refer to, Miriam, for the last 4 years, which concludes this year, we have a new one starting next year, hopefully, from 2016 to 2019. To have such a strategy is really important. It brings about a common point of consensus that it's important to be multi-stakeholder, it's important to be open and transparent, and many of the principles of internet governance, which you know very well about. So that's really key. To have a document like that in different organisations helps to clarify and to create a point of departure on how to be in internet governance spaces. I would also point out that Internet Governance Forum, the Eurodig, which we help to support, and other spaces are very important for, at least for the Secretariat to be involved. It's again a bridge space whereby you don't always have member states. You don't have all the member states represented here in the IGF, for example. So it's very important that as a sort of an intermediary, that we help to bring the ideas, information, expertise back to the organisation, to the member states, and vice versa. So it's a very important thing to realise that this really helps. These sort of spaces really help me, and it helps, and therefore it will help civil society, you, in talking about issues which are maybe not on the agenda at the moment in the Council of Europe, which could be. Our lessons learned include, I would say, that there's a need to communicate more, of course. So we need to keep on talking. Dialogue is key. I know it sounds a little bit obvious, but to avoid misunderstandings, to avoid petitions regarding certain draft texts in the past. If we talked more, then maybe we would have understood things better, and it would be more conducive to agreeing on an approach regarding a standard or a benchmark. And my job really is to make sure that I can mainstream the importance of this dialogue and the voice of civil society, amongst other things, throughout the organisation with colleagues who don't necessarily engage in internet matters. Finally, what I need from civil society, what the Council of Europe needs from civil society, is help in building capacity, help in implementation of standards. We don't have infinite resources. We have finite resources. going out there on the field, in countries, talking to judges, to policymakers, to lawyers, to whichever stakeholder group, about the importance of internet freedom, about the importance of the Guide to Human Rights, about the importance of data protection, ensuring that at the national level there is an approach to internet that that we understand that this involves regulation is perhaps something to seriously think about before you do it in different fields, and that needs your help. So capacity building implementation is coming on strongly more and more as in the future. So there's a lot of work ahead with good communication. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Lee. So I think we had several interventions from representatives from intergovernmental organization. So we try to move more to civil society speaking, or also the academic. And I want for that to start with Marianne. So maybe you can have 3 minutes. So.
Good morning. I'd also like to thank and commend Miriam for this wonderful paper. So I look forward to reading it. Miriam, you listening? Yeah, fabulous paper. Full transparency report here. I'm actually paid by a university, so I work for a public institution. I'm a full-time academic. That's my job. But I've also been involved in the Internet Governance Forum, firstly as a researcher, which is what is called participant observation. But that observation part became more and more participation. So now I'm kind of talking with the other hat as someone who's been involved in the Dynamic Coalition of Internet Rights and Principles and the Gender Dynamic Coalition. And I feel this is very important to note that civil society is a much more complex category than we tend to suggest by using it in the singular. We have civil society organizations which are professional, non-governmental organizations who also employ people. We also have networks made up of these sorts of groups. We have small groups, informal groups, grassroots groups, we have individuals. We are all in this room by definition civil society because we all belong to, I hope, we have a passport that got us here, which means I hope we pay taxes. Who cares if you don't? Not my problem. Point being that civil society is used here far too bluntly, and my first point is that civil society is both informal, professional, and formal forms of non-governmental, non-corporate intervention in this work. So I want to make that very, very clear, because the difference between a professional civil society person is that they have an employer, they have a job to do, just as an intergovernmental organization employee has and a corporate employee. Okay, but I want to actually move to the real point here. If you look at these 3 booklets, an English translation and discussion booklet on the Marco Civil, Brazilian initiative, the Charter of Human Rights and Principles for the Internet, which is coming from one of the dynamic coalitions, and I want to focus on that in a minute, in my last 5 seconds, and the Council of Europe Guide for Human Rights for Internet Users. These are concrete examples of cooperation. These are concrete outcomes of working together. And each of them reveal different points of entry, different points of affiliation, and different points of accountability and responsibility. If you look at them together, this is what we're working towards. And this is, in fact, one of the opportunities, but also one of the difficulties. We are all working in a highly competitive environment, a highly, highly skilled environment, and we are all working to cooperate. And yet we have sometimes quite conflicting priorities and needs and requirements. So the fact we can look at least 3 outcomes of this nature is an extraordinary achievement. So I just want to note that for the record. That's what it looks like. The other thing I want to say in this short time is that if we move to how the IGF has been structured, at least on paper, its main constituency, at least on paper, is something called dynamic coalitions. Now, from a formal, professional civil society point of view, this is a problematic category because, and for other stakeholders, because the problem there is for a dynamic coalition as it's been currently understood within the IGF, is it is neither, as we say in English and probably other languages, it is neither fish nor fowl. Fowl meaning bird. So what is it? What is a dynamic coalition? We can't talk to it as if we would a governmental representative, we can't address it as we would a corporate representative, and we can't address it as if we would a professional NGO person. So dynamic coalitions have been suffering have been suffering from this ambiguity. However, they are also an attempt to generate a space for cooperation, and that has been happening. So hopefully if you all go there, which would be great if you did, the Dynamic Coalition main sessions on Thursday afternoon and Friday morning will actually be showcasing the kind of work that has been produced from the Dynamic Coalitions. And I think that's very important. So, okay, give me one second, okay. Is that okay? Just a sec. All right, so what happens at this level of interaction with professionals is that what we're doing, we're moving around with these multiple affiliations and conflicting pressures upon us. Everyone is doing a job, and what we forget is the IGF actually humanizes what are deeply techno and technocratic processes. Humanizes is because you get to know someone as a person, as a human being. You get to understand them in the specific role they have. For governmental organizations, the things they cannot and may not say in public, the sorts of settings in which by law and by convention certain groups may not enter, and of course those are also openings for contestation. The same thing for a corporate representative, they are bound by certain contractual obligations. The one set of groups and networks that can arguably move a little bit more freely is this larger constituency called civil society, but people may want to disagree with me. So what we need to learn when we're trying to produce these kinds of outcomes is you have to take people at their word on one level, but you have to also understand that you are interacting in a professional and sometimes confined form of interaction. And that can help when you feel that everything is impossible and your interlocutor is simply representing global capital, when in fact he or she may simply be trying to do their job. Okay? So that's something you just learn. It seems obvious, but you don't really know what this really means at an experiential level and at a meaning-making level until you get really deeply involved in this work. So one is compromised. One does have to make concessions, and one cannot take positions that are pure and unadulterated because you have to interact with people who you normally would not be interacting with. And that again is what the sort of dynamic coalition structure has been trying to achieve. Has not entirely succeeded, but it's not a complete failure if you look at these three kinds of outcomes. So I think that's my point now. I know we're going to get another round, so I think, I just want this. We are talking here about consent building. I would like us to try and move our conversation to considering that what we actually begin with, all of us in these settings, is we begin with dissent. We begin with disagreement. We begin with difference. That's what we're working with. And what we need to consider is that we need to find spaces to allow dissent and disagreement of a deep, deep nature, institutional, cultural, ideological, to actually also exist in this space. And that's the challenge, I think, for the IGF going forward, and certainly a challenge for its dynamic coalitions as it tries to find a space and a voice amid some very, very sophisticated, highly skilled and highly committed organizations from the government, the corporate and the professional NGO sector. So that point is what I want to say right now. I have a lot more to say, as you can always expect, but not right now.
Okay, thanks, Mariana. We will hope that we will have more time to say things. So we're arriving at, I think, in the middle of our session. So just really want our speakers to keep brief so we can leave some time for the audience to ask questions, to have kind of interaction here. So I want to move to Deborah here so we can talk more about other spaces, starting like I think WACES, ITU and Human Rights Council, and really to talk about the experience of civil society there. And then later we can move to ICANN with Bill. So, yeah, please.
Thanks very much, Rafiq, for inviting me. I work for the Association for Progressive Communications, which is both an international civil society organization and a network of members. And I'll share some experiences today working at civil society at the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, the Human Rights Council, the UN General Assembly, and the World Summit on Information Society process, the review process which is currently going on. And I think one point that really stands out to me is that there's no one multi-stakeholder model. There's some key principles and practices that make civil society engagement easier and more effective and influential, but there's lots of different points along the spectrum that civil society can engage in. And the first most important thing for civil society, from my perspective, is to know the process, to use it, and to push it further. For example, working at the ITU, there's some opportunities for civil society to engage in its own right, to independently interact with different meetings, but really where the decisions are made are at the intergovernmental level among member states. So one effective strategy we found is to join national delegations and to be able to work on text, to even, in some cases, civil society has been able to speak on behalf of their government for smaller delegations in order to get text into resolutions and into binding decisions. And that's an example, a concrete one that we had at the Plenty Pot, the recent meeting in Korea that the ITU held. In other venues like the Human Rights Council, civil society can engage through independently if they're ECOSOC accredited organizations or if they can get an ECOSOC accredited organization to accredit them for different meetings. And in Geneva, it's really a more open process when there's resolutions that deal with, well, and if we're talking about internet governance, there's some resolutions that deal with internet-related public policy issues. So that's why we're talking about it in this context. And last year, there was a resolution on the right to privacy in the digital age, which created a new special rapporteur. And in Geneva, for example, there were negotiations where civil society was invited in and even given the floor to weigh in on the discussion and to help influence the discussions and give their opinion. In New York, I want to emphasize that it's a bit more closed. We're still able to engage in the two UN General Assembly resolutions on the right to privacy in the digital age, but we weren't able to openly attend sessions. We were able to attend at the will of the chair. We weren't able to take the floor, for example. So it's really important to know where you can fit in and where you can influence, and to understand even within the same processes or the same issues, civil society can play a different role. And I want to talk a little bit about the WSIS review process, which, as other speakers have mentioned, have been going on for a few years now in different phases. For example, there was a UNESCO phase and Connecting the Dots that was previously mentioned, and civil society was able to attend, to intervene in the negotiations or the deliberations over the outcome text. There was also a year-long process held by the International Telecommunications Union called the Multi-Stakeholder Preparatory Process. And in that case, civil society organizations that were not even ECOSOC accredited could attend and could input text and actually in the negotiations take the floor and intervene just as other stakeholders could. And when I said initially we have to push the process, I think for a lot of us in the room, we were sitting there expecting to be given the floor, and then we learned after a few meetings we could just take the floor at the same time as others and not even necessarily have to wait for member states to go first, which was, I think, a bit different for us. And by the end of the process, a civil society representative was actually asked by the chair to help come up with the draft text in one section. So I think really being part of the discussions and pushing, not being very timid based on other processes where we're asked to be only to take the floor or only to intervene at a certain level to really push them is one strategy to move things forward. But again, highlighting the divide between New York and Geneva, the WSIS process has now moved to New York, and we're really much more limited in how we can interact. There's informal consultations with non-governmental stakeholders, and then there's governmental consultations or negotiations. And we're really, at this point, there's only 4 more meetings in New York. They're informal informals, meaning that civil society isn't, or other stakeholders aren't allowed in the room, and we're not even allowed to observe. So I think really it's important to know where you can play a role, and when you're allowed to participate in your own right, there's one strategy, and other times you might have to go through governments, which is not, and it doesn't replace the independent civil society voice. It's more of a tactic in order to advance your own priorities in the process. I think a second really critical issue is to have access to the documents and to be able to meaningfully engage. And this is something that's a real challenge when, in some cases, the documents are closed or they're not really circulated to non-governmental stakeholders. And, sorry, there's a fly here. As much as civil society and other stakeholders can share documents, that's a strategy that's been really effective in helping provide meaningful engagement, because otherwise, if civil society is in the room and really doesn't know what's going on, or doesn't have the full understanding of the discussion, we can't really be very effective. And since I know we're running short on time, just a third point is the link between national, regional, and global, and back down to the national is extremely important. engaging in national consultations, inputting in national debates is one way to start influencing your government's policy. Not all regions, of course, have regional deliberations, but colleagues, for example, in Latin America and Africa at APC have found that to be a useful venue. And then engaging in your own right at the global level is, of course, where you can influence global debates. But once outcomes are adopted and start to be implemented at the national level, that's another opportunity to actually influence change on the ground. And then just one final point in terms of challenges, because I'm not sure if we'll actually have another round of interventions, is of course the biggest challenge is funding and resources to make this all happen. Even if a process is fully open, remote participation is available, you really don't have a diversity of voices unless there's funding both to attend the meetings and funding for people's time to stay engaged, to follow the debate and not to drop off between meetings or different processes, because really there's going to be only certain people at the table, only certain interests that are represented, and that's not really what we would hope to have in terms of meaningful, inclusive, multi-stakeholder debates.
Thank you. Okay, let's move to kind of other, maybe different space, like ICANN and then to Freedom Online Coalition, and start it first with Bill Drake.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Bill Drake, and I teach at the University of Zurich, but I'm also involved in various civil society coalitions over many years, and in the current context am, for 3 more weeks, the chair of the non-commercial users constituency in ICANN, which has 450 members. So Rafiq had sent out some questions that he'd suggested we focus on. So I had thought in terms of those questions, but I'll just speak more integratively and extemporaneously about civil society to ICANN. And I will do so referring only to the piece that I'm involved in. Civil society and ICANN is actually broken up into several different spaces. It's a complex architecture that would make people outside crazy, and we usually have to spend a good deal of time explaining it to people who are coming in for the first time and taking a look and trying to figure out where to get engaged. But there's 3, depending on how you think about it, 4 different spaces within which one can work. In the one that I'm involved in, I would say the following. First, I wanted to say about the intergovernmental organizations, I think that it's very interesting to hear about your efforts to accommodate the involvement of civil society, and I think that the extent to which that you have is really a marker of how much things have changed in the past decade, and it's something that we often kind of almost take for granted now. People who who don't have a historical perspective forget that back in the WSIS, in the first phase of the WSIS, we were being thrown out of the room. We didn't know whether we had the ability to participate. I remember standing up to speak for the Internet Governance Caucus, a civil society coalition, during a WSIS meeting, and as soon as I started to talk, a gentleman behind me who was a vice minister from a country said, "Mr. Chairman, who is this man? Why are we listening to him?" You know, and started shouting. So those days are gone, I think. By and large, UNESCO, Council of Europe, OECD have all done great things in accommodating greater involvement for us. Of course, there are obviously very strong limits. There are some international organizations where still it's very difficult. One thinks of the international trade environment, the WTO, and other trade agreements. Participation is very much intergovernmental, and the ability to influence those discussions is really limited to being able to occasionally have some briefings and side chats and things like that. ITU, you have to join generally. Historically, you've had to join a national delegation to participate. It's been hard to get civil society recognized as an independent actor across the multiple spaces because of the way the ITU is set up. So there's still room for growth there. ICANN is a very different situation because it is truly, at least in legal terms, an equal footing multi-stakeholder process. And it's one in which civil society actually gets to vote on things alongside peers from various fragments of the private sector. So the group that I'm involved in represents civil society in the generic name supporting organization, which formulates policies pertaining to top-level domains, generic top-level domains. And in that context, we have an architecture in which basically civil society gets 1/4 of the votes. So that means that when it comes to trying to actually work on determining what kind of policy should apply for who is database or the different types of GTLDs, whether there should be closed generics or whether we should have a larger GTLD program in the first place, et cetera, freedom of expression issues, a lot of things that we care about, privacy, we're able to actually cause some trouble sometimes and at least take the sharp edges off of bad policies that, you know, in our view would have been worse. So that's really quite something. Very often, the different parts of the private sector, to be able to pass something, have coalition with some of us. So that means that we are able to work a variable geometry. Sometimes we work with one part of the private sector whose interests we share on a particular issue. Sometimes we work with a different part of the private sector in opposition to the one we worked with on the other issue. So this is going on all the time. We have this very kind of complex interaction with these folks. But we do have the ability to engage directly. And in consequence, I think we've had a reasonably good impact on you know, ICANN's policies pertaining to GTLDs, especially more recently. In the Dublin ICANN meeting that happened just a few weeks ago, we celebrated our 16th anniversary as a coalition, and I would say one of the things that obviously matters to the influence of civil society groupings is having durable and effective coalitions. We've seen other coalitions come and go. I think often our influence comes in a sort of longer term rather than immediate impact way. We're able to sort of get ideas onto the table that slowly work their way into the process and eventually become hard for everybody to ignore. So for example, we pushed for human rights as a general proposition to be brought into ICANN as a standard of evaluation of policies, and we formed coalitions with friendly governments and other actors in the ICANN space, and now we're seeing real progress in getting this into the bylaws potentially and recognized more generally. Privacy protection, we spent years railing about privacy protection in ICANN, and finally what we managed to do was form coalitions with the registrars who sell domain names, but also we brought in Article 29 from Europe to be partners with us. We brought the data commissioners into the process and engaged them. So reaching out, forming coalitions with different parties, maximizing our what bit of leverage we have, because we don't control resources. You know, civil society doesn't have tanks, it doesn't issue taxes, it doesn't have the same kind of material resources that others can bring to the table. But what it does have is the ability to put normative pressure and the ability to contribute expertise. We have very often, and there are people sitting around this table, who have contributed much to this, we've been able to put ideas onto the table that proved to be something that led to a possible solution. And I think civil society particularly could be influential in situations where you're dealing with complex issues, there's a lot of uncertainty among different actors, nobody's quite sure what will break a deadlock, and you need to have a kind of orthogonal, different kind of approach sometimes. And sometimes people don't come to it immediately. You know, you propose something like human rights and they say, ooh, we don't know what that means for us. But then eventually over time, as other dialogues play out, it becomes clear that this is actually a reasonable way to take something forward, to break a deadlock, to advance a process. So I do tend to think in kind of more evolutionary rather than revolutionary terms. I don't have unrealistic expectations that civil society should be able to walk into a meeting and you know, we put our thing at the table and everybody says, oh yes, of course, we put aside all of our commercial interests and we will do exactly what you say. That's not going to happen. but we can soften bad policies, we can slowly change the discourse, we can get certain ideas on the table, and if we muster expertise and if we have coherent coalitions advancing those objectives, we often can make a difference. And I think that's important. So just to conclude, what I would say that a lesson I would draw from the ICANN experience for the intergovernmental organization environment is the decision rules, the rules of participation really matter. It's real, you get a qualitatively different experience out of civil society in terms of contribution if they're really given the opportunity to be full partners in a policy process, to contribute their expertise, to put ideas on the table and work them through. If you have a process that says the government's talk for 90 minutes and in the last 5 minutes, 3 people can stand up and speak for all of civil society for 5 minutes, that generally speaking is better than nothing, but it is not anything like what we get in a multi-stakeholder setting. So I would certainly encourage efforts to think about ways in which the decision-making processes can be adapted to take fuller advantage, not because there's a normative obligation or we'll take to the streets and riot or something like that, but because we actually can contribute constructively to the debate and help to solve problems. And I think that that's sometimes not always fully appreciated in some intergovernmental settings. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Bill. So we'll go with Baird. So you have really brief time to speak a little bit, but from an ICANN perspective. So yeah, please.
Sure. Thank you, Rafi. I'm Baird Asmat. I'm with ICANN. I'm part of the global stakeholder engagement team at ICANN. I come from Egypt and I work out of Egypt for the Middle East and North Africa region. And just in the interest of those who do not know what ICANN is the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. It's the global body in charge of developing policies pertaining to the domain name system. And in relation to civil society engagement, Bill, of course, is one of the old veterans at ICANN, especially with the civil society stakeholders. But more generally, ICANN is also one of the several or many organizations in the IG space that allows for multi-stakeholder participation. Policies at ICANN are developed through a bottom-up approach. Talking about civil society participation at ICANN from sort of staff or organization point of view, we see it at I would say two levels. One is the regional level. This is where regional teams, particularly in regions that are not very well represented at ICANN, we develop regional strategies to involve stakeholders from our regions, from governments, from business, from civil society, academia, technical community in ICANN policy development work. We do outreach activities, we do capacity building program, and when I say we, I don't mean only staff, I mean that we, in all our activities, we do collaborate with community members and experts from our community in those activities. So part of the regional strategies we have in regions like Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East, we have a particular focus on reaching out to civil society groups and involving them in our work. Of course, the level of engagement varies from one region to the other. It depends on the knowledge and expertise and the kind of capacity that is available in the region. But that's one sort of level or angle. The other angle is to look to take more of a holistic approach and to look at the sort of global stakeholder engagement at ICANN. And one of the initiatives that ICANN embarked on together with community members in the past few months is to develop a strategy for civil society engagement in ICANN. A group of community members have been discussing this for a while now. Some ideas have been put on the table, and the idea here is to have more structured approach towards involving civil society by providing them with the tools to enable them to participate, but also to participate effectively. So it's not about bringing more people to ICANN or to increase the number of civil society groups or organizations that participate in ICANN, but also to work on making this participation more effective. So the group is talking about tools like communication tools, like online tools, talking about strengthening engagement efforts on the ground through outreach activities and capacity building activities. And this work is becoming to be more mature with a draft strategy document that should be available within few days for the broader community to see and to provide comments on. Thank you.
Thanks, Bear. Okay, we have 20 minutes left. Maybe we can try to get 5 extra minutes if you don't mind about the lunch. But let's move with Matt to talk about Freedom Online Coalition. That's kind of different setting, and also the different topic. It's about cybersecurity. And then really we will try to go with the rest of speakers to talk about regional and national experience, and really I want everyone to keep to 3 minutes if possible. Yes, Matt, please go ahead.
Thanks, Rafiq. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge that this is a wonderfully full room, and thank you all for coming. It's fantastic. Okay, I'm going to switch this around and talk about the Freedom Online Coalition. Second, what I'd like to do is hopefully give you a couple of pieces of food for thought. Deborah referred to earlier on about the WSIS process, and that's what we've been hearing a lot about here. And just to tell you that the WSIS document that we've been talking about has considerable input from civil society in it on key issues of interest to civil society. And if anybody wants to understand what those are, they can come up and talk to some of us up here, and particularly Deborah. The reason why we have language in that document is because over the past 3 years, we, some of civil society, have been consistently engaged in the WSIS process. And this leads me to hopefully what's a first kind of bumper sticker, if you will, for addressing Rafiq's first and second questions, which is, from my perspective, how we assess and how we enhance our participation is based upon 3 key issues, which I call the 3 C's. The first is coherency, so coherent comments. The second is constructive approach. So we're seen as a valuable partner over time. And the third is consistent presence. And in many ways, the third one is as important as the other two, because throughout the process of the WSIS, we were there, and we are still there, engaged in the WSIS. And because of that consistent presence, and because a small number of civil society organizations were very constructive, participating in multi-stakeholder processes, dealing with the ITU and the WSIS, we were able to have the kind of impact that we've had on the language. Now, who knows whether or not that language will survive through negotiation process, but again, it's that coherency, that constructive approach, and that consistency that really helped. Rafiq asked, what are the lessons from other stakeholders? So if you want a lesson from the other stakeholders, take a look at the schedule for this meeting. What's the first thing that you come across pretty much on every day on the schedule? It's ICC meeting. That's one of the greatest lessons we can take away from other stakeholders is organization. They are consistently organized and consistently coming together to review their positions and where they can agree and find consensus.
and obviously they're organized. So again, two big learnings for civil society, which of course are quite challenging because in civil society we don't necessarily always have a consistency of views and are able to come to consensus, but something we should strive towards, organization and consensus, if possible. Rafiq asks, what do we learn from, okay, what do we do with regards to partnerships? Obviously, civil society has a voice, and it's a unique voice, and we should be leveraging that as much as possible. But partnerships are highly desirable. Why are partnerships highly desirable? Because one voice is one voice. When you add another stakeholder to that, that becomes much more than two voices. It becomes much more noticeable. And this is a fundamental reality that we have to deal with as civil society, is that we have to learn and start to want to work across stakeholders, because our voice is multiplied by working with other stakeholders. Okay, so that was just hopefully my takeaways. So, on the Freedom Online Coalition. Freedom Online Coalition is an intergovernmental organization grouping of 28 countries that work to promote internet freedoms online around the globe. They do it from a kind of foreign policy perspective, if you will, promoting internet freedoms in other countries. It's intergovernmental. One doesn't have an opportunity to get involved in the inner workings of that intergovernmental grouping, but they do have a set of working groups which are multi-stakeholder and open to participation, and those working groups are regularly renewed, and there's opportunity for civil society participation therein. They also occasionally ask for civil society and other stakeholder help in pulling together recommendations on issues of importance. And they invite civil society on a regular basis to come and participate in substantive discussions at workshops in their annual meetings. So I highly recommend, as a co-chair of Working Group 1 of the Freedom Online Coalition working groups, I highly recommend that you follow the Freedom Online Coalition, that you look at what they're doing. They are addressing issues of interest to us. Now, clearly on some of those issues, we will have very divergent opinions. But this is an opportunistic engagement. If we have an opportunity to get involved and are invited to participate, we really need to assess to what degree it's advantageous to us and to what degree it's appropriate. It may not be appropriate to engage with governments on some issues, but it may be highly advantageous to engage in this kind of an environment. And that was a judgment call that I made when I asked to be involved in the Freedom Online Coalition. So I think one needs to step outside of civil society occasionally. We need to work on partnerships, and we really need to work on our approaches. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt, for this. So it's more about, freedom and so on. We want to go with Susan. We should talk more about the trade and internet governance here and about maybe TPP. So, please.
Thanks, Rafiq, and it's a pleasure to be here. So as Bill mentioned earlier, civil society engagement in trade agreement negotiations is limited. And I'd like to share my experiences as a civil society stakeholder during the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations, and as the point person for what was called the Fair Deal Coalition in New Zealand, which focused on raising awareness about copyright provisions within the TPP. First, however, I think that a point on the nature of trade agreements should be made. By nature, they are multilateral, plurilateral, or bilateral exercises. Trade agreements are negotiated by and between states. So theoretically, government should be consulting all stakeholder groups within their country and consider this input in practice. However, private sectors mainly paid attention to most. So there's a growing connection between the spheres of internet governance and trade. And the most obvious example is the provision in the TPP that deals with country code top-level domain operators and dispute resolution processes. And that deals with DNS policy. But Internet NZ and Fair Deal Coalition focus mainly on digital copyright issues, such as ISP liability and copyright for temporary copies on the Internet. So that's also discussed within the IG sphere. So turning to the mini case of the Fair Deal Coalition, I attended 4 negotiation rounds of the TPP on behalf of Internet New Zealand, which as a CCTLD operator is a technical community organization, but at the same time as an open internet advocate is a civil society organization. So Internet NZ had concerns about copyright provisions in the TPP text that would interfere with the open internet. We developed the Fair Deal Coalition to be able to address these concerns with our domestic negotiators. And there's something that I'd like to provide a few takeaways as Matthew did. Some of them are quite similar actually. But what we did in this case was we realized that the copyright chapter was broader than just the digital provisions. So what we did is we reached out to the Royal New Zealand Foundation of the Blind, the Creative Freedom Foundation, which represented artists, Open Source Society. We reached out to Trade Me, which is New Zealand's equivalent of eBay, and the Librarians Association. And so we thought that by using this approach, by developing relationships with stakeholders that are not internet focused necessarily, but can provide and support your arguments and show useful illustrations, that was really effective. So again, building partnerships with other stakeholders, and if the case calls for it, perhaps consider building partnerships with non-internet focused organizations. Another thing that we decided to do was to take a constructive approach. So I think there's a role for protest in the case of the TPP, but we did not take that approach. So what we did was we just basically presented negotiators with evidence-based arguments and really sought to engage with them constructively. And we saw that did have an effect. And lastly, because we're running out of time, I think it's important to, when you're working towards a cause, to understand the environment and all of the stakeholders involved, and to reach out to the other side, to listen to what they have to say and to understand their arguments. I think that it's not just if we come into a room, we have a multi-stakeholder discussion, we can also be multi-stakeholder outside of the meetings and really truly engage in that way. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Susan. Okay, so let's move now to more the regional and national level, starting first with Hanan, and then Unji, and then Yuso. Hanan, please.
Hi everyone, my name is Hanan Boujami, and I'm managing a program on IG for the MENA region. Such a great lineup of veterans in the IG field, and I really don't know what to say, but I think I can speak a little bit about if really, civil society from the Middle East can influence internet governance. And I mean, the short answer to that is no. And there are many reasons, why we have quite challenging situation integrating civil society from the Middle East in the global discussion. We've heard examples from intergovernmental organizations or international corporations, and examples of ICANN and how they try to integrate civil society in their work. But in the case of the Middle East, there are three main challenges, and challenge number one is the knowledge gap. Like, it's really hard to get people to be involved in the topic because on the one hand it's quite technical, on the other they really want to know how the internet functions and how that impacts their human rights, because that's the main topic in the Middle East. So we organize many training programs to get people to integrate this global discourse, but we get just a very tiny selection of participants who manage to infiltrate global fora like the IGF or ICANN meetings or ISOC or IETF and so on. So the interest in the topic itself is very, it's unfortunate that there isn't much interest in the topic of internet governance, which makes it very challenging to select representatives of civil society from the region to be part of this kind of conversations. Otherwise, we claim the space, on behalf of these people, and then we say, oh, we're civil society. No, we're not civil society. Like, we're not the only ones in this space, and it's really hard also to find a slot within this space, because more than often, I call this kind of environment as a clique of people, and they are kind of monopolizing the whole discussion, which does not represent other people, and that makes it a little bit imbalanced in terms of the need, you know, and the concerns of other people who unfortunately can't be here because they don't know how to get here, they don't know, you know, how to participate and so on. So I work specifically in that niche market to try to bring some of, you know, the people who would like to be here and can't be here. Another challenge is, you know, the political context, and it's very, very important. Now, IG, I think, features at the bottom of priorities of, you know, people from the Middle East because of the reasons that we all know, but at the same time, it's ironic because what's going on at the security level is reinforced by the use of the internet, you know, that's, you know, namely the problem of ISIS and so on. So it's very relevant for these people to be here, you know, with us from the Middle East, but they're not. So it's quite, you know, maybe that, you know, we should do a little bit more work and maybe try to simplify, you know, the issues and decode them in a way that is more relevant to these people and approachable. Because, as Miriam pointed out, we're really here at a much higher level, and even Marianne pointed that out, like people here are quite at a certain level of understanding, and then things get complicated, you know, even for me sometimes, you know, when I want to link human rights to the DNS industry, like you really need to do your homework to be able to connect, you know, those two fields and prove that human rights are relevant to ICANN work. I'm sure the first time that was mentioned in ICANN, as Bahir said, or even Bill, like, oh, what's that? You know, we really don't want to know. We just want to do business here. So that's one of, you know, the other challenges. One last one is, I think it came up in your, in the Council of Europe presentation, is about, or maybe yourself, is about policy advocacy. Now, of course, in the context of the Middle East, it's really hard to reach out to the governments because of, you know, many reasons. First of all, the concept of multi-stakeholderism does not really resonate with governments in the Middle East for the simple reason that the overall environment is not really participatory, and I don't want to generalize because there are examples, good examples, quite progressive, but many governments from the Middle East, they don't believe in the concept of multi-stakeholderism, and they don't think that civil society should be actually involved in the policy-making process. So that's even kind of bashing the dreams of normal people to be part of a process, and that's really, you know, unfortunate, but it's one of the cases. But still, we have a good pool of activists who would like to do work, but the trick is they still don't know how to advocate, you know, these issues with governments. And that's because of the lack of policy advocacy strategies, because you have to be in a certain way, you need to be less controversial, less confrontational, more diplomatic, to make the small wins you were referring to. So it's the same thing in the Middle East. So I think more work should be done, you know, to engage people at the local level, but also at the macro level, because we don't want them to stay, you know, active locally or regionally. They should be able to come to the global level and also claim, you know, this space a little bit so we can have some kind of balance. We don't have only one or two organizations claiming that they represent civil society, because that's just not correct. It's just a long way. So that's what I was going to say about the three challenges, and thanks for the slot.
Okay, thanks, Hanan. And staying in the region and moving to my home country. So while Mohamed Marzouk is now working for the private sector, he used to be the former ICT minister in Tunisia, and during the democratic transition, still ongoing. But so he will give us a kind of different standpoint here. Yeah, so please.
Thank you for the invitation and for giving me the opportunity to speak about this important topic. I will speak here regarding my 2 years experience in Tunisia as former ICT minister from the end of 2011 to the beginning of 2014. I start with two statements regarding the role of Internet in global policy governance and some words about the role of Internet in Tunisia revolution since 2011. No doubt, Internet is a powerful enabler for citizens to access to information and is also an efficient tool for wide public consultation. The traditional way of developing solutions to public policy problems is changing. It's clear also that an open government approach makes government more open, accountable, and responsible to citizens. However, it's clear that this kind of policy-making process requires time and commitment. The government, even if it's the ultimate responsible and accountable for the decision, is aware that the significant contribution of stakeholders leads to better decision. Civil society and academics generally benefit from a more credibility and audience as they have less business interests than business sector, private sector, and so they are playing an important role in citizen opinions. As you know, or you may know, in January 2011, a revolution occurred in Tunisia. Internet and social networks particularly have played a pivotal role in this revolution and after. It's clear that this powerful tool, Internet, is continuing to play a central role in the political and the public issues after the revolution and enabled the dialogue and information exchange between all the country components. The dialogue between government and civil society occurred many times and on hot topics, but in general without a clear process or a well-defined organization. In the following, I will mention shortly some examples during my tenure in Tunisia. First example is the creation of IGF Tunisia by mid-2012 in order to organize the dialogue on Internet issues between all local stakeholders. The role of Internet in Tunisia revolution makes clear the social and political role of Internet and the need of dialogue between all stakeholders to handle those issues. Second is, in fact, the build with a multi-stakeholder approach of Tunisia digital strategy for 5 years. First, 3 days workshop took place at Barqa, June 2013, with more than 80 attendees. Global strategy and development access was done. And first draft of work plan and project also was done. Second 3 days workshop also was organized in 2014 with more than 100 attendees and with more participation of civil society. My two successors have participated to those workshops of in this process, the participation of civil society was strengthened since the second workshop in 2014. The third example is the preparation and the rollout of Tunisia Digital Advisory Council since 2013, and with review of this, the constitution of this council in 2014, and of the members, public and private. Criticism from and pressure from civil society, and by the end of the current ICT, the current ICT minister agreed to include a member from the civil society in this council. And I think this representative will be appointed soon in this council. There are also other examples, but in order to save time, like, for example, the contribution of civil society to and impact on cybersecurity law preparation in Tunisia, the OTT service policy, mainly for voice over IP in Tunisia. Also, there are impact hearing and discussion with civil society in 2014 and other organizations. I remember that also Tunisia in 2013 organized the Freedom Online Coalition Forum in Tunisia. And thank you.
Thanks. So we move with the last speaker, Yusso. You got, I guess, maybe the last word, and try to maybe extend a few minutes. Oh, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Rafi. Thanks for handing the final word over to the governments. So, I'm Juuso Moisander. I'm the desk officer for WSIS Follow-up and Internet Governance at the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of Finland. And I'm involved in discussions and dialogues in pretty much all of the organizations that have been mentioned here so far. But I'll just briefly focus on our national WSIS coordination, national IGF process, and talk a little bit also about the CSTD and WSIS plus 10 and what we've been dealing nationally with it. So first of all, we believe that multi-stakeholderism begins at home, so we value that very much. Since preparing for the Tunis phase, already more than 10 years ago, we've had a national WSIS coordination group, which is open for all, multi-stakeholder, and it has about 50 more or less active members. The group decided to go on after the WSIS process as a follow-up group, which then eventually led to us organizing our first national IGF in 2010. We see this as a process. We don't do events. We feel more it's a multi-stakeholder process that is going on. So the government obviously sees a lot of value in this. We facilitated. I'm chairing it. I'm also chairing the national IGF, but it's open for all stakeholders on equal footing. And it's also a way for us to bring the civil society voices to international arenas, as many here mentioned that there are challenges in participation, resources, representation, and so on. So through this group, what we've achieved and what we've done is not only 6 national IGFs, but also some statements. Last year, one on IANA transition, a Finnish multi-stakeholder community position paper on that. We contributed to the 10-year review process at the CSTD through a multi-stakeholder paper. So my government did not submit a paper of their own, but we are in the category of others as the Finnish multi-stakeholder WSIS community. And also this year, preparing for the WSIS plus 10 event, when the first zero draft was released, we had a reading of the paper a few days later among all the stakeholders, and then we developed the Finnish reaction and position that we then forwarded on to the European discussion amongst governments. We see a lot of value in civil society participation at the CSTD, in the working groups on IGF improvements, especially on the one on enhanced cooperation. And we see that the more we do nationally, that's also a way kind of to bring our model to the global level, and then we hope that this spreads to many other nations as an encouraging example and a good practice. And also nationally, I'm hoping, as we have a principle of openness in the government, that even in other organizations on the trade side, the civil society would understand that we're trying to have their voices also in our positions, and therefore, like whenever a Finn speaks on international arenas, there's a little bit of civil society involved there as well. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Yusso. I guess I cannot keep people from lunch more than that. So I want to thank our speakers I want to thank our speaker. I'm sorry that we didn't have time for interaction. As software engineer, I'm really bad in time estimation, I guess, so I'm really sorry for that. But, I mean, if people want... Oh, okay, yes? There is a question, yeah, why not? Yeah.
All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Roander. Paraná's North State University, and also a participant from the Youth at IGF program, being part also of the Youth Observatory of the Internet. So before you guys can finish the session, with all due respect, could we really call this session a workshop? Because as previously scheduled, we had 35 minutes for the discussions and plus 35 minutes for the questions and answers. So how can we effectively discuss the ways that the civil society can impact the internet governance if we don't have the necessary voice so we can tell our experiences and our thoughts on that matter? So I just wanted to leave you guys with these questions of ours, and I thank everybody for the attention. Thank you.
Okay, I guess I can get all the blame for that. Yes.
Why don't we take a few questions?
Yes, I mean, what I said is I don't want to keep people from with lunch, but if they want to stay, they are welcome. So if they want to ask question, yeah, sure. Yeah. So who want to stay and ask?
I'm happy to stay. I'm happy.
Yeah.
I really, yeah, we always have these issues about time constraints. So point is well taken. I'm happy to stay.
Yeah, sure.
Please.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah, please go ahead.
First, I will speak in Portuguese so I can be clear. So I ask to put your phones in the translation. Meu nome é André.
My name is Andre, and I'm part of the Youth and IGF program. And as of today, we're going to launch the Youth Observatory for the Internet, which is an agency which tries to place the youth in the debate of Internet governance. And I would also like to combine that with other comments made before. Where is the civil society in this debate, especially in this debate? Because I thought the civil society was going to have to play a major role in this workshop, and this did not feel like a workshop. So I'd like to ask you, where is the voice of the youth? Because if I were to answer the question that the workshop proposes, I would say that no, the civil society cannot do anything against internet governance, and this was my question. So in addition to what he asked, where are the youth in this debate? And then I'd like to propose a question which is for our Youth Observatory, and I'd like to propose that we all discuss this with the audience and the table so that we can contribute with solutions. Thank you very much.
My response is I'd like to carry on, keep talking, tell us more, please. Point taken, at least from where I'm sitting.
Are there any questions about what was said or during the session from the audience?
Yeah, just an answer. Can I speak English? It's not my native language anyway. So, thank you, first of all, for the compliment and telling us that we are elder among the elders. Why would you really need that the youth be represented? You started to say, of course, I mean, youth should be represented too, but it's not a necessity. And the fact that youth is not represented here, because it's also a question of experience, doesn't mean that civil society is not represented. You said, you asked, where is the civil society in this workshop? I agree, and I think Rafik recognized that it was too ambitious to have so many speakers, but we have heard about different experience, and all of them are from civil society. I am myself from civil society, and I have been active in for more than 10 years in the settings. So we are civil society together, okay? Even if we have some more years than you do. And I cannot be sorry about that.
Yes, I also identify as civil society. I remember in Sharm el-Sheikh there was a huge delegation of high school pupils, Egyptian high school pupils and British high school pupils, and we've not seen that in the last few years. And it would be good to see that enabled because it takes time, it costs time and money. I believe the youth have a voice. The only question is, if you are setting up a youth observatory, how you envisage your participation. If you want to put speakers forward, that would be welcomed. I think it's just an issue of organization. But I'd like to see more efforts and resources deployed to bring in high school pupils and university students under 25. We had this experience with the Syracuse college students in Workshop 31. They've been very active for the last week from their home base in New York, and they're all undergrad students. So there are ways to incorporate the youth, but we are all civil society here, so there's a difference. Some of us are just younger than others.
Yes, thank you for giving me the floor. And I have a very practical question. So I'm not civil society, although I'm sympathetic to civil society. We at the OECD are organizing a big ministerial event which will take place in Cancun in June next year, on 21, 23 of June. And we've been discussing how to bring the young people who are, I would say, the primary users and the future, in fact. I have kids, well, kids, grown-ups. And it was not obvious who to ask to come to represent, to give a voice to the youth. And we could do that throughout the sessions by, having young people taking the floor, asking questions, challenging the policymakers, the ministers, and the other stakeholders who will be here. And I'm very much in favor of that. The only thing for the moment that we have done is, thanks to the support of the Mexicans and the business community, is organize what they call a hackathon, where we will bring in, because then we need to pay for these young people to come to the ministerial, and they will come and they will develop an app, and there will be a prize. But I believe that in addition to the hackathon, we could very well have young people in the room, but you need to tell us, who do I send an email to begin organizing this? And resources are limited. We already support civil society coming to the meeting. We could probably find a little bit of funding to have some young people, but please give me a name, send me an email. I'm giving you my business card after that. Thank you.
I want to respond because, I'm not taking it personally, but since I joined myself, get involved in IGF, I was one of the founders of the Youth Coalition on Internet Governance. I left that a few years ago because even if I am in the 30s, I don't feel that I can represent or talk on behalf of the youth. So we worked on that. And we had a lot of discussion, how do we get involved? Yes, maybe we need to have some young people in the panel, and we could get this kind of requirement. But the important thing is not to create a separate stakeholder of youth, no. Is to have young people in the different stakeholders. It can be challenging for them, some of them, like the government of the private sector. So we have the setting, like the Youth Coalition, that need to be rejuvenated somehow to do more work, and so to voice your concerns. So that's what I'm saying. I take your point because I went through this. We had the whole discussion and we worked on this topic. So myself, I thought I'm still young, but okay, I cannot represent you guys. But always it's about representation problem. Is when we try to have this panel is to really to get experience. It's not about age, it's really about the experience, to say different setting, because not everyone is aware about what the OECD is doing, for example, or the Council of Europe. So to hear from that, and we want to keep the discussion going. It's not workshop, it's a round table. So that was a challenging sitting here, is how you can speak. And there was maybe not enough, I can take that, not enough moderation in terms that we keep brief so we can listen to everyone and to have room for discussion. So, but point taken. Yes, Hanan. Yeah, sure. And
No, my
Farzan.
point was about the same thing you just mentioned, because I mean, I'm moderating this group by mistake, I think. I'm not sure, the Youth Coalition on Internet Governance, and they're quite active on Facebook if you would like to join them. So you just have to join Facebook in case you're not there already. And they're doing really good work because they have been active in different workshops here, and I'm not sure why you're not involved or you're not involved, but anyway, try to tag along. They have quite, active people doing a lot of work in different organizations, so it would be really, really good if you can tag along. And this field is quite challenging for a lot of people, especially non-English speaking members, or if you don't come from I call them privileged country like the US or Europe. So we need, I think, more representation from other regions. I was speaking previously about the experience of the Middle East and how it's challenging to bring people from that region to be part of this. So maybe, we've been working on this for a long, long time. It's more than 10 years and it's not easy. You will see for yourself. If you're interested, you will definitely bump into a few challenges here and there.
Hi, I'm sorry that I have to leave, but I just want to let you to know, my name's Susan Chalmers, and I'm a member of the Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group, and I will be sure we'll probably have a meeting before the end of the week, so I'll be sure to tell the Meg of your concerns regarding youth participation.
Thank you. I have a remote participant comment from Fernando Marquez. His question is, so can civil society impact global internet governance? What is your takeaway from this workshop? He actually indicates that no more than 140 characters with spaces.
Civil society groups and networks have already influenced global internet governance.
Excuse me, just a clarification to make sure that there are no misunderstandings from our part. We're not proposing no separation from stakeholders or empowering the youth so they can take over the world or stuff like that. We're just trying to, in a first way, be heard, because it's actually my first participation here at IGF, and this program, this initiative from the CGI-BR and the Internet Society was, it's like they were opening the world on internet governance for us. So we have a lot of energy, we have a lot of interests, we have a lot of backgrounds, different backgrounds, and we just want to add them to the actual discussions that are already being made. And opportunities like this and panels that are so important, so interesting to participate. And we were here with with an expectation to participate, to give just a little of contribution and tell, we're here. We're here to help. We're trying to help. We're trying to give our vision of this matter of these subjects. So it's not an aggressive posture, but just a request of a little bit of attention. So, and I thank you guys for being discussing it here for us. Our objective here is done. It's done. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for raising those important points and to come here and to actually contribute to the conversation, I think, in a really meaningful way. I'm very excited to not be a youth anymore. I feel very old today. But I just wanted to add that in addition to this in-person meeting, there are intersessional ways to get involved between IGFs, like online meetings. You can contribute to documents. I know it's not as exciting as being here with all these people who have traveled to be at the IGF. There's also national IGFs. And something, I know you're not asking for youth to be a different stakeholder group, but it does seem that youth and other stakeholder groups might get more opportunities, like from the private sector's funding or the technical community's funding. APC does run some capacity building programs. They're not nearly as large, but we have, for example, the African School on Internet Governance. We run now in 3 different regions, the Gender and Internet Governance Exchange. I think Hanan has left now, but there's also some programs that she's running in the MENA region. So I think youth is underrepresented. I think youth from civil society is even more underrepresented because there aren't so many resources to send people to meetings. But there are opportunities, smaller ones, and also opportunities to engage in between meetings and to stay on mailing lists and through social media as well. So I think we really look forward to more engagement from youth.
And also an invitation, there's something called dynamic coalitions. And to be dynamic, you need to have a lot of energy. So we really welcome your energy. If you target all the different dynamic coalition meetings and just come to them and join, you have helped us enormously. And that's one easy space to enter. What you do with it after you enter is really go for it.
Yes, sorry. Fernando Marquez is again posing his question. He would like a couple of answers and actually more attention. And if you can respond to his question about whether civil society can impact global internet governance. I think Miriam briefly responded, but if we can get a couple of other responses, that would be great.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, Anne, yeah, please.
Yes, the response for the OECD is yes, civil society influences the work of the organization.
I agree the answer is yes, they can, or yes, we can, but it's not very easy and it takes a lot of effort and sustained effort. We've gotten text and resolutions. To give an example, civil society was pushing for a new special rapporteur on privacy. That was something we really were pushing hard for, a sustained campaign, and it was accepted in the end. There's examples at the ITU I can give. At UNESCO, we specifically added language on anonymity and encryption that ended up in the outcome document. That's not getting put into the WSIS outcome document as so far. So, I mean, there's huge challenges, and I think we have to have really specific goals, and we probably aren't as influential as some other stakeholder groups, but there are some examples and some small gains that I think we can share.
Yeah, we still have someone.
Thank you, and I wanted to respond to the response and ask if there was any way all the civil society organizations might just start a document that says impacts and by year. And I think that might be really helpful in answering the question.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, I think this one of, we do a lot of work, but I think we don't document enough. We are not enough visible because, for example, for me, involved in ICANN, I think we have an influence there because of how the process works. So we can have an impact. So in this roundtable, we try to emphasize some practical example to see how. And also I think Matt made good points about what is needed. It's kind of the requirements. It's what's needed to be, to maybe civil society improve the way and how to do things. So, Mariam, you want to add something?
Yeah, on this documentation processes, of course, it's very important, but I think we need to have also some outside documentation and maybe assessment, because it could easily turn into a PR exercise. And I would say that for some years now, there is a good amount of academic research, academic literature on this issue, the participation of civil society, the outcome of this participation. And to answer the question of the insisting person, the dictatorship of the remote participation. I would say yes and no. What is important is that there is different ways of participating and there is different ways of impacting. You may not have a direct and immediate impact, but you have a serious impact. You can have a serious impact on the long run, and it could be also indirect, for instance, through international organization, as I mentioned at the beginning.
I would like to invite you all to the tomorrow in the Youth Coalition on Internet Governance. We'll have the initial run of the Observatory of the Youth. So you can go and discuss with us the issues that we're talking here briefly. And we can talk about the ideas we think about the participation of youth in the internet governance. It will be in 2 p.m. So room 5.
When? What time?
Tomorrow, 2 p.m., room 5.
Okay, thanks. Happy to see that something that I worked on is evolving. And this is important. We find that one issue about the Youth Coalition is the turnover, because people get old. So you need always to get a new leadership. Yes, we all started younger than. Okay, I think it is really time maybe to wrap up and to. I want to thank that everyone who stayed that extra 30 minutes. It was really. Think good for us to have some interaction, and thanks again. Thank you. Bye bye.